Right, hello, I'm Tony.
Oops.
I'm a master gardener with Penn State, though I don't represent Penn State tonight, I represent myself. The reason for that is I want to be able to talk about permaculture within the talk. It's just certain ways of doing things that the Academy hasn't yet embraced. So let's just get right to it. The reason it's called Edible Garden today is because it's a little bit different than yesterday. Here's a sign from the Second World War: plant and raise your own vegetables. Every garden a munition plant. Well, we don't need that today, but we do need a battle against viruses, I think. That's what we're talking about. Grow it yourself. Here's another one. The Victory Garden counts more than ever. I think it still does. This is Dig On for Victory. Of course, this guy's got a nice basket of fruit, but he'll probably die from smoking the pipe, which we've learned isn't so good. War gardens. Well, we've got a Victory Garden against the virus. Grow vitamins at your kitchen door. That still applies because a lot of our soils have been devalued and they're not producing the vitamins in the fruit and the vegetables that we need. Uncle Sam says, cut your food costs. It's true. It does cut your food costs. Let's think about how much we spend on food a year, maybe $10 a day, $3,650, maybe $4,000 a year on food, each person. Well, if we could grow 25% of our food, that would represent $1,000 per person, so that's worth it. So why grow your own food? Yep, save money, get exercise. That you could save on a gym subscription for that. Save food with more nutrients. It's right outside your back door. Food security, yeah, and knowledge for life. Why food security? We grow 6% of our food in the Philadelphia region, 6%. That doesn't sound like food security to me. So if you've got knowledge for life, growing food, that's a real blessing. Here's a picture of an old garden back in the 30s. It's a great garden, don't get me wrong, this is fantastic, but there's a lot of space wasted. And what we used to do back then was we would bring the farm into the garden. And then a lot of people thought about it in our era now and realized we don't need to do that. We're not using farm equipment, so we can make it much more dense. And here's Michelle Obama, First Lady, growing food with the kids at the White House garden, being a great example a few years ago on doing what we want to do. So why do we do raised beds now? We didn't used to, now we do. And the reason is, you can contain it really nicely. So you can put it in the middle of the lawn and the grass can't get to it. You can weed rack around the bed. Soil compaction is eliminated. What does that mean? It means if you know where that bed is, you don't step in it. And I don't know about you, but I used to step in my garden quite a lot. Never step in your beds once you've done them, even to reach things. Your bed shouldn't be more than 2 feet stretch into the middle of the bed. So never do a bed more than 4 feet wide, because you need to be able to reach in 2 feet, and you can't reach more than 2 feet without straining yourself. And soil compaction is important because you want those roots to grow really easily, and you'll have stronger plants and you'll have better yielding plants. Weeding is easier because you know where it is. You can put them anywhere. Look at this bottom picture. It's basically on a driveway or a brick patio. So you don't need to have a garden to have raised beds. They're very organized, they warm up, yeah, they drain. Anyway, all in all, they're less erosion, you don't lose the soil, it's not washing down the driveway. So planting in raised beds, look at this one at the bottom. It's so packed up there with vegetables. And the reason it's so packed up is the more you stuff in, the less weeds can grow. There's no light for the weeds. So we like to make it really concentrated like that. Pack them in. And of course, here's another picture. The main path through your garden can be 2 to 3 feet wide. So you can bring the wheelbarrow down and things like that. But between the beds, you don't need much more than about 1 foot, really. And if you're really trying to maximize your space, that's the way to do it. Now, they can be anything. This is pretty ugly, this stone stuff, but really whatever you've got, you know, if you've got to get growing, you've got to get growing. So you can use stone, you can use wood, anything to make the frame of your bed if you want to put a frame around it, you don't have to. You know, and then you can fill it with compost and soil, and away you go. Now, this is also a raised bed. We don't think of it like that. This is a stone path with a wall, but really it is a very neat and interesting looking raised bed. Now, you've got to put the bed in the right place. You need 6 to 8 hours sun minimum, and if you can get 12, that's great. You'll have a bigger yield. Everything will grow better. You can avoid high wind areas so that you don't have to support certain things. You don't want it to be wet because not all plants like wet areas. And make sure you site your food garden near the house. In permaculture, we call that zone 1. Really, all your food plants should be within distance where you might walk in your pajamas. You know, if you won't walk there in your pajamas, it's probably too far away. You won't go and get it when you need it for a meal. And, you know, so keep it really close to the house, especially for herbs and things like that that you might use each day. So planting the garden, interplant all sorts of different things that work together. Use successive planting. That means when the plant's done, pull it out and plant something else in its place. Use trellises, grow upwards as much as you can, and things like that. This is my garden with some potatoes growing, tomatoes. There's some lemon balm back there. There's some echinacea over here. Pack it in. This is the difference today that we do before. Reduce weeding. I use straw. I really like straw and as a mulch around plants. Now there's a difference between straw and hay. Hay is grass, and you don't want to buy hay because there's seeds in hay. Straw is the stems of cereal, and there's no seeds, it's just the stems. So always make sure you buy straw. Don't get hay. This is great. I love it because it's kind of easy to work with. But you can use, wait a minute, you can use pretty much anything. You can use plastic, you can use cardboard, newspaper, and you can use wood chips if you want. But that's a little bit dodgy with food growing because you mustn't mix it in with the soil. Because if your wood chips get mixed in with the soil, you will steal the nitrogen from the soil and your plants won't grow so well. So grow lots of different plants, grow them all over the garden, mix them up. There's leeks down the bottom left here. There's Swiss chard. There's different plants. There's my potatoes. This is my backyard, this middle picture. This is all I've got to work with. And this is all potatoes. And there's some parsley over there. But when those potatoes are gone, you can plant something else. So plants grow everywhere. Look, this lady's in Alaska. She's planting all these greens in these gutters, rain gutters she's put on the side of her house. And the reason was she's getting so many rabbits down here, she couldn't plant greens. So she's put them up there, and that's it. Her sun line is through the house there. And she's doing pretty well. I did a little experiment with that at my house. The greens didn't get very big because there's not a lot of soil in there. But if you have to, that's one way to grow plants. So, you know, here are some seedlings, tomatoes. There they are in the ground, in between the straw, and there they are growing really nice. So you can plant winter food, you can plant for winter. This is how you plant leeks. You make a little hole in the soil with a dibber, and you just put the little leek plant in there like that. There it is. You just sit it in. Maybe you push the roots down with a pencil and just leave it. Don't even fill in the hole. Let the rain and nature fill in the hole. And, you know, a few months, 6 months later, here's a nice crop of leeks. And they can sit there all winter. Just go out and take one every time you need one. I always say I like to grow a leek a week. Yeah, a leek a week. So I have leek soup once a week. Here's succession planting, talking about that. Here's my potatoes, my small crop of potatoes I grow every year. And as soon as that dies, the end of June, they die back. I dig up the potatoes and in go the winter squash, followed by winter squash right away. So don't let that ground lay fallow half the summer. There's no need. And then there's a few surprises in the garden. Sometimes this popped up in the corner here. This is a fig. a fig tree. I had to move it. There wasn't enough sun there. And this looks a bit like corn, but actually, if you look over here, this is the same plant. There's the root. What does it look like? Ginger. That's ginger. So you can grow ginger in Pennsylvania. It takes about 6 months. It needs 6 months at 80 degrees, really, if it can get it. But I've put in a 4x4 bed of ginger this year because I'm getting to cook a lot more with ginger and drink it too. I like ginger tea. So if you're going to start a bed, I made this really simple for Coatesville children that I was working with. This is how you do a 4x4. I just take drywall screws, 3-inch long, pre-drill the board, so you're not fighting two boards when you're trying to screw it together. I pre-drilled that. That means there's a hole through there, and you just screw it with your screw gun into the other 2x6. This is a 2x6. Don't use pressure treated wood. I use regular pine. And it's very simple, 4x4, and there it is, screwed together. And then I just cut the grass with my hand clippers. I don't even dig it up. And I put down 6 or 7 layers of newspaper like that. See that? How simple can it be? And then you fill it with nice new compost and soil, topsoil, right over the newspapers. And the whole point of the newspaper is to hold back the grass so it won't grow. Once it's in darkness underneath there, it won't grow. But you must never dig up this 4x4. I never dig now. I'm a no-dig gardener. All I do each year is make a hole, put the plant in. I never dig it up because soil knows how to make its own structure. And when you dig it up, you completely wreck the structure that it's been growing for months. So just do that like that. There it is, rake it in nicely. And then ask yourself, well, I'm gonna plant, this was a cucumber, a melon, and 2 tomatoes, I think. And that's all you can do in a 4x4 really, because those are big plants. But look, you can take some sticks and you can mark it off. There's actually 4 times 4 is 16 square feet. And there's something called square foot gardening. So you can think of it as 16 square feet and you can put a plant in each square. Now this is 12. I'm just putting a plant on each corner there because I know these plants are going to get very big. And this is how you take a plant, if you're new to it, this is how you take a plant out of the pot. You squeeze the pot and you put your fingers between the stems like that and just shake it out very carefully. Have the hole ready. So when you've pulled away the pot, bloop, you just plop the plant straight in the hole, ready to go, and move the soil back in around it. As soon as you've done that, water it in and keep watering for maybe 5 or 6 days afterwards to establish the plant. Unless it's raining, of course. And so as a gardener, we keep our eye on the weather. And not long after, you know, within a month or 2 or 6 weeks, you're looking for some sticks and some support for all these things. This looks like a mess. There's the, I'm pointing to it. There's the original shape, look right there. And I'm a bit untidy. Look, the grass is growing all around it. Mainly cut the grass with a weed whacker before it goes to seed so it doesn't drop seeds in your bed. But this thing's getting unruly. Look, if you look really closely, you've got to look down there. There's the melon growing. I only think I got 2 melons from that one that year. They didn't do too well, and the cucumber failed completely, which happens. But the tomatoes really took off in this little 4x4. Look how many tomatoes. I mean, there were bowls and bowls and bowls of tomatoes from this little 4x4. And then at the season's end, it comes to an end. There's the tomatoes. Look, there they are, starting to die back. Still tomatoes, probably in October, early October. There's a mess. Look at that. That's what it looks like at the end. And you can clean that up, and that all goes on the compost heap. So that's how to do a weed-free garden. Never dig it. Eventually that newspaper is going to rot. So the next season you can do carrots in there, you can do root vegetables. So now you need to do some garden plant maintenance because once you've established it, that's just the beginning. So you've planted it, you've planted your garden, now you've got to protect it. Do I have to weed? Not if you did it right. You've got to sustain it, then there's the harvest, there's the fall, and there's a season extension if you can. Now you've been saying to people, I planted a garden, it's my garden, and you've been on the phone to friends, and why not? There's only one problem. These guys think it's their garden. We think it's ours, but they don't really know about my garden concepts. And so every one of these guys believes they own your garden. Even though they've done no work and you've done all the work, they're going to help you share they're going to share in your harvest. Now, these guys, this is the groundhog. I don't tolerate him. He's the one animal I do not tolerate because he'll wipe your garden out in the morning. So if he's near you, I put a special smoke bomb down their holes and I deal with them because there's nothing else you can do. He will get in and he will destroy your work. And he has no right to do that. You can speak to him. He won't take any notice. So there's a little smoke bomb called Revenge that I buy from the hardware store. And I put it down the hole and he's dead in 3 seconds, basically. Now this squirrel, I live with him because there's so many of them, although I do cage them and take them away, which you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to move wild animals. But I cage these sometimes, but I also protect myself. I'll show you how I do it in a minute. But he's a rascal. He doesn't attack everything, but he will dig things up. He's just too busy. Rabbits, they're going to eat all your greens, anything green, you know, lettuces, cabbages, spinach, anything like that. They're going to eat it. But a little fence, only a foot deep or 18 inches high, will keep the rabbit out. They usually won't jump over it. There's the groundhog again. The raccoon is a nuisance. He mainly likes sweet stuff. Like he'll come for grapes and corn. He loves corn. So I never grow corn. I don't actually like it, but he'll like your corn. He'll take care of it for you. Deer are a real problem. If you have a property that gets deer, you're going to have to make a fence. And I would say put the garden near to your house as possible. And you might only need a 6-foot fence. I know people talk about 10-foot fences with deer, but you might only need a 6-foot fence if it's near your house, because they might not come up so close. Here's some caterpillars. I don't know which kind these are, but the main ones we get are the white cabbage butterfly. They get on all our greens. But guess who takes care of these for you? It's the wasp. Wasps eat caterpillars. They'll look all over your kale and your lettuce to find a caterpillar, and they'll cut it in half and they'll take it back to their nest. And it's because they're carnivores. So although we might not like wasps, as long as it's not a big nest right in the garden where the children play, give them their freedom. They will actually do some pest control for you on the greens and the leaves. So this is some of the people we share our garden with. So this is what I do. I have a PVC little cage here, and I put some plastic ties around there, which creates a kind of a hinge, and I can lift this side up and the other side. So I start off my seedlings down there. When they get a bit bigger, I start them off, move them out into the garden, and I use that cage to protect them because the squirrel will dig them up looking for nuts, and there are no nuts there, but squirrel won't listen. Here's another lower size. So here's some PVC again, about a foot to 18 inches high, with wire mesh stretched across them. And that's squash in there. Now, what the squirrel will do with squash is take a bite out of each one. He's such a nuisance. There's no reason for him to do it, but he thinks the next one might taste better than the last one. So that's what he does. So there's a wooden version. And I actually grew peanuts in this cage one year, a 4x8 of peanuts. I had about 2 pounds of peanuts. That was fantastic. And I really loved them. And the squirrel didn't get one peanut, which he would really like. So here's 2 beds I have. And what I've done there is I have a cold frame. I built a cold frame around one of the beds. Here it is, just 2x3s. And I just stapled plastic around the sides so the cat couldn't get in and things like that. And to create a bit more heat. And the nice thing about having that frame is I can put a 1x2 frame up here, and I can sit these little wire panels with plastic on, which I made, on top. Now, what's that for? Well, we're getting so much extreme weather, so many rainstorms. This is a funny year. This is kale in here, but now I start my tomatoes in here. I put my early tomatoes in here, and things like I've got half of one of these is in ginger this year. I got 4x4 in ginger, and so I can control the water, what's on there, and I can keep the extreme storm water like this off of the tomatoes, which sometimes will ruin your tomatoes. So you can use row covers on your cabbages and lettuces, anything that doesn't need pollinating. You can throw row covers on from the moment you plant them, which will stop the butterflies and moths from laying caterpillars on your greens, and they'll last a lot longer. And you can also throw row covers on your squash when you first start the squash, because they don't need to get pollinated for 2 months. So throw the row cover over, and that will stop the squash vine borer from destroying your squash, because that is a daytime moth that lays eggs in the stem just above the ground of your squash. That's what really knocks your squash over. But if you put a row cover over, and really the first flowers that appear on your squash are male anyway, so you don't need them to be pollinated. But later, hopefully, the season for the vine borer moth is already gone. They've done their bad work and they've gone on. And you open them up, and you can just grow squash as much as you like. You can use netting as well to keep the birds out and the squirrels. And then the plants that need pollinating can actually, the pollinators can get, the bees and everything can get through the netting. So let's use nature's pest management whenever we can. Let's not spray. I don't spray any chemicals in my garden. I've never found the need for it. But by using nature's pest management, here's the praying mantis, and that eats up a lot of things, as you know. This guy is called an assassin beetle. I love these guys. It's the only thing I've seen eating all the nasty things like Japanese beetles. They'll grab hold of it and they'll stick this proboscis into it and suck their life out of them. I brought some of these over from a customer's house I was working on. I saw them on the wall. I snagged a few in a plastic bag and I brought them to my place. Unfortunately, they've reproduced all over my garden. Now, this is the dreaded tomato hornworm caterpillar. That's actual size, by the way. It's about 9 feet long. No, it looks like that. It's about the size of my thumb. It's a very big caterpillar, and it's so well camouflaged. It's got that green with a certain texture, and you can't even see it sometimes on your tomatoes. They'll wipe you out in about a day for your tomatoes if you go away and there's enough of them. So for those, you do have to pull them off and squish them or throw them in the garbage. You have to get rid of them. Now, you don't take this one off. Why don't you take this one off? It looks like it's been rolling in a rice jar. The reason you leave this one, and this is why one needs to get a little bit more knowledge about your pests in the garden. There's good pests. 15% of the pests in the garden are bad boys, and 85% are actually working for you. So this one, this tomato hornworm, has been parasiticized by a wasp. She's laid 100 eggs on the back of this guy. It's already toast, really. In about 3 days, these guys will all hatch into tiny miniature wasps, which will parasitize any other caterpillar that happens to be on your plants. So this one you don't squish, you leave it. Okay, it'll eat a few more tomato leaves, but don't kill that one, because that one's working for you. This is nature's pest management. If you learn a little bit about the pest, you'll know which are the good ones. Now, here's a non-toxic pest control manager. This is me. We're talking about this spotted lanternfly that's coming in now. The way I remove it is with my shop vac. I go out into the garden and I suck those lanternflies off of anything that they're on. But you can also use this for a potato squash, a potato beetle, squash beetle, cucumber beetle, basically all the same critter, really. And I just suck any critter off the plants I can that I think can go without disturbing the plant, without hurting the plant. And here's a trick. The moment you see squash beetles or cucumber beetles, you might have to go to work, but if you don't, get to them immediately. I found a little trick at the beginning of the season. The sooner you suck those first 5 or 10 beetles off your plants, you won't get an infestation. If you leave it for a week or two, you'll be inundated and they'll probably beat you because there's so many of them. So I use this little shop vac to suck any critter I can see that I don't want off my plant. And of course, I don't grow many flowers in my garden. If you can't eat it, it's not in my yard, always say. But I do have to encourage pollinators to come in. So I grow sunflowers and a few things like that. These, of course, are bumblebees. There are probably 15 varieties of bumblebees in this area. There are 350 species of wild bees in Pennsylvania. Most of us have never seen them, but there's 350 species, and they're working for you, and they're pollinating. They're tiny and they're big. Even the carpenter bee is a native bee. The honeybee is not a native bee. It was brought over 400 years ago by the invaders from Europe, and it shouldn't even be in this ecology. It hasn't co-evolved with our ecology. It shouldn't be here, but we want the honey. Now, these guys don't give us honey because there's too few in a nest, and most of our bees live in the ground, and they live alone. So they're of no commercial value, and the Academy rarely speaks about them, and I've discovered them. There are 3,000 wild bee species in America, all over the country. It's an amazing resource, and we're cleaning them off with sprays and so on. So here's another one. This is called a mason bee. There it is, look, it's falling out of that hole, or it's going in. I drill these pieces of wood with a 1/4-inch hole, and then they come and live in there. This mason bee is not a carpenter bee. The carpenter bee makes holes. They're a nuisance, but they are indigenous, and they don't pollinate. So I don't have much time for the carpenter bee. This is not a carpenter bee. It does not make holes. It looks for holes, and it lays its eggs, 4 or 5 eggs in each hole, and then it muds the end over, which is why we call it a mason bee. And they're wonderful. They're our friends, and they live all around us. So do I have to weed? Not much if you mulch. And I like to say, I like the straw for mulch. It's people joining us late. I'll just say there's a difference between straw and hay. Do not put hay on your garden because that's grass, and straw is cereal. So you can use cardboard, plastic, all kinds of things. You can do useful cover crops if you don't, to keep out different things. In the summer, we say in permaculture, I'm also a permaculture designer, we say turn the problem into a solution. The problem is the solution. I have too many Norway maple seeds in my hedgerows, left over by an old tree once, and I just strip them all off these sticks growing in my yard, and I just put them down and I use a summer mulch. I've got this, I just rip it, and we call cut and drop, we call it. So there's a way to get some summer mulch. And there are opportunities to ground cover. Like I say, this is a weed. We call it a weed in Pennsylvania. Most people don't know what it is. It grows all over my yard, and I encourage it. And this is called purslane. And you can eat it raw, or you can dry it, or you can cook with it. It's on Egyptian stelae. They've been eating it since 3,000, 4,000 years ago. This plant, for me, is a savior because I've been a vegetarian for 40 years. And this plant has the highest level of omega-3 fatty acids of any plant. And it's growing wild in Pennsylvania, and most people despise it. I let it grow all over my yard, and it prevents other weeds from growing because it covers the ground. And then I dehydrate it, and I save bags of it for the winter, and I add it to soups and smoothies and things like that. So that's called purslane. That's our friend. Over here, you're looking at my lemon balm patch. This is all lemon balm. That's echinacea over there. I basically put that there. This purple cone flower is echinacea. That's for the pollinators. I've never dug up the roots and used them as echinacea. I prefer to buy it. But I do drink this lemon balm. I dry all this lemon balm. I harvest it 2 to 3 times a year. I dry it, and I drink it all winter. Wonderful stuff. Very good for shingles, lemon balm, and any kind of, electrical movements on your skin, like sciatica, things like that. It's wonderful for that. Now, look, I don't know if you can see these numbers over here. On my screen, I got all these people's faces. But we have to sustain this garden. And look at this amazing amount of rain we get. A 1-inch storm on the average home in Pennsylvania, 900 gallons. That's equivalent to 44,000 gallons on your roof a year, just on your roof. I mean, that's not in your garden. Well, you can use that. Let's make use of that. A 1-inch storm, you wonder why. Look at this. This is my garden here, and this is my neighbor's garden. All I'm doing is bringing my downspouts onto my land. I'm just bringing them onto my land. I'm not actually walking around watering this grass. I'm just putting all the water, no water from my roofs leaves my land. It stays there. It doesn't go into the street. This guy, my lovely neighbor, all his water goes into the street. But look at what, in the middle of summer, look what happens. Look at how green this is over here. Just from keeping the water. I have a cherry tree here, and that benefits from all the water. There's a peach tree there. There's a grapevine there. This used to be a pear, but it didn't make it. And this is my main growing area for vegetables. So people, when I give talks, somebody say, why does my barrel fill up so fast? I say, well, there's 900 gallons falling on your roof in a 1-inch storm. And this is a 50-gallon barrel. So in a 1-inch storm, you could fill 18 barrels around your house. That's why when you break the downspout and bring the water in, you've got to have water going out because it will fill up very quickly. I'm not so keen on barrels anymore. Now, I'll tell you why in a minute. Now, here's you can buy this cheap old pump for $15. It's a pond pump from Harbor Freight. Connect it to a hose, drop it in there, and plug it in, and you can have water under pressure, you know, through the hose using one of these pond pumps. Because water, gravity fed, doesn't have a lot of pressure. It's just kind of sneaks out. Now, here's a really ugly thing that you can do in Coatesville, you can't do in Lower Merion. You know, so I bring this pipe from the roof into this barrel, and then I go into this tub. This tub was going to be a pond. I was going to sink it in the garden, but it was so useful above ground because I just dip a 5-gallon bucket in there and throw it out. Anyway, this all grows up around in summer and you don't see it. But this water comes from my roof, like I say. So I have probably 300 or 400 gallons sitting right there all the time, which I use. Rainwater grows your plants better than house water. Now, well water might be okay, but house water contains a lot of stuff that you don't want the plants to. Here's another thing I do. This is on the downspout, and there's this thing here. It's called Catch a Raindrop. You can buy them, and you can connect a hose to it. So it grabs some of the water going down the downspout, and the hose will just put it into the garden where you want it. You can block the end of the hose, and you can make holes along the hose, and it will just spill out onto the plants. And that's a very useful product. There it is, look. That's called Catch a Raindrop, about $8 each. And you can put them, if you have a 3 or 4-inch downspout, it's got to be the square downspout. You put it in and you bring the downspout into here and continue it. And there's a little hose going off into the garden. So you can add a lot more water to your garden using a Catch a Raindrop. You can only get those from HomeDepot.com. They don't sell them at the store. Now look, I wanted to show you this because this is where those leaves were. And this is where there's no leaves. This is the benefit of a mulch, is it keeps your garden damp and you use less water, and if you go away for a week, say on holiday, if you're mulched, you'll keep a lot more water in the garden. But as I say, you can use wooden mulch around vegetables, but don't mix it in with the soil because you'll steal the nitrogen from the ground. But all other mulches just sit on top. So it's time to harvest. And that's what it's all about. You want to be able to harvest. You've got to get a yield from what you do. And here's like some of the summer yield: tomatoes, cucumbers, green peppers. By the way, green pepper, tomato, potato, all the same family. That's called the Solanaceae family, or the nightshade. So you want to be able to move those around the garden if you can. We tend to eat a lot of the nightshade. And here's the fall. Here's that leek that we saw growing earlier. You know, you can have a leek a week and make leek soup all the way through the winter. You can leave them in the garden as long as it doesn't freeze too much. And there's the greens, the fall greens. And storing stuff, you can store lots of things in the basement without refrigeration. This is winter squash. And look at this guy. I've kept that since 2010. It's 2011. There's the two. So that kept over a year without refrigeration. Look at these blemishes. The squirrel got to this one, and I kept that just to spite the squirrel because he tried to take chunks out of it, but it still survived. Here's a 2011. This is 2011, but it's already starting to to go a little bit, you see. So this is the one you use first. Some of them will go, they'll go punky in the basement. But you can store an awful lot in the basement. You've got to keep the air moving around it. And different things like to be stored in different ways. And you can look that up on the internet, like potatoes and onions. Everything likes to be stored differently. These guys just like to be on a shelf. I also dehydrate a lot of my food because that little plot of mine grows more food than I can eat. I share a lot with the neighbors, but also I dry tomatoes all summer. This is my little Excalibur dehydrator. It's a 4-shelf. You can get a 10-shelf, a 12-shelf. Don't do that unless you're going to get commercial, because it takes a long time. Well, it takes me 15 minutes to lay up this one. And that's all the time I want to spend each day, 15 minutes to lay up 4 trays. That dries overnight and a little bit more. And I put those dried tomatoes in a bag, and I have bags of my own dried tomatoes for the winter. I actually prefer dried tomatoes than fresh. I'm like a kid. They're too tasty for me. So the wet vegetables like that, tomato, you've got to use a dehydrator. You can't lay them out in the sun in this climate because it's too humid. In the Middle East, on the roof, it's so dry they can do it. Here, you can't do sun-dried. They'll go moldy before you've dried them. Here's another way to dry things. I built this little frame. This is 1x2s, look, and with some screening that you put in the window. I just stapled it on all the way around. 2 of them, one with a crossbar, and I just put them together, and I put a rubber band around 2 screws to hold it together. I can put that in the garden. I use this for herbs, all kinds of herbs. Herbs grow dry quickly, or they don't get moldy, they're not too wet. Purslane, if you dry it, you've got to use the dryer. You can't use this. It's too wet. It's a succulent. But that's a 3 feet by 3 feet. I can dry a lot of lemon balm and mint in there. Here's another way to dry things. I went to Joann's and I got this sort of plastic netting. They sell it in like 50-inch wide rolls. So I got these this netting, and I just sewed it on my sewing machine. And that's probably oregano in there. And I hang it up on my back porch. That's a great way to dry oregano. Keeps the bugs off. It's inside the netting, and it's better than put it in a clump and hanging it, because the air can get through there. So this is the absolutely supreme way to dry herbs. You put them in a brown paper bag and you put them on the back shelf of your car. Now the bag costs a cent or nothing, because you go to the store and get one. Within a week, lemon balm, mint, everything, all the herbs are dried in that bag. Open the bag, and it's perfect. It's really, now this happens to be my friend's BMW, so this dryer would cost you $49,000 and the brown paper bag. So it's expensive. No, if you've got a car with a back shelf, and many of us don't because we've got hatchbacks and stuff, this is brilliant. There's no better herb dryer than that brown paper bag, believe me. So in the fall, we have to tidy up. Look, here's my little plot. And I use leaves from the neighbors' trees, and I just cover the ground with them as a mulch so that weeds don't grow in the winter. Because as you know, some will. Don't throw away your biomass. That's all the waste in your garden. Don't put it on the bag. Don't put it in a bag and put it out for the garbage man. That is next year's groceries sitting in that bag. You're throwing them away. You must compost everything. And if you don't compost it, there's another thing you can do. So here's my beginning compost heap. Do you see that? It's about a yard by a yard by a yard, and it's wire. So this is what we do. There's the cucumber plant, and the tomatoes, and everything else is in there. Nothing dirty, nothing like, no thorns, no real weedy seeds with lots of seeds. No, no. This is just the good stuff. And here's the operation that I got. So there's that cubic yard that you saw earlier. That was way up here, and it just composted down over the winter until you get this beautiful, what I call black gold. When you open up the compost heap, there it is. Now, let me tell you about composting. Composting is not rotting, okay? When you get that pile right, and it's like a third green and 2/3 brown, so leaves, sticks, anything brown, even cardboard, and then grass clippings, the green, which is nitrogen, and the other stuff is carbon. When you get that carbon nitrogen mix, what happens inside here is you get a bacteriological reaction, and sometimes this will go to 160 degrees for 10 days in the compost heap. That makes real compost. And what makes it so hot is bacteria. There's basically a civilization growing in the center of that mound, and it's heating up, and it's also going into Armageddon and destroying itself in about 2 weeks. That now you've made compost. That chemical reaction has destroyed all the weed seeds, all the pathogens, any diseases that were in those plants. That has happened, and that's called compost. Everything else is rotting, just rotting, decomposing, okay? Very few people make compost because they're not attentive enough. When you open up that compost heap, there is nothing that looks like the original in there. That's the sign of real compost. And then what I do is I put all that in this sieve and I just turn it by hand. And look at that, that's what I get. Beautiful, it goes through this screen and I get this beautiful stuff. Anything that wasn't composted, still recognizable, goes back into the new compost heap over here. And I start filling that up again with my vegetables from the kitchen. Don't put any meat, cheese, nothing from an animal goes in the compost heap. And then you will not have rats. You will not smell. So only plant material goes in the compost heap. So that's really important to know, that compost goes through this bacteriological change, and it's really wonderful stuff. Now, here's something else you can do. It's called hugelkultur. We call it in permaculture, we call it hugel. It's a German word. It means mound culture or mound bed. I cut my cherry tree. This is the cut-offs from my cherry tree. What am I going to do with it? I could put it out on the street, but I hate to throw away biomass. So I bury it. I took all the soil out of this bed and moved it over, and I put the sticks in the bed. And then I put grass on top of it. Let's see if I got a picture of that. Yeah, see, then I covered it with grass and more sticks. So I'm creating carbon and nitrogen, which I need for that to break down. That's going to take a couple of years to actually break down. But I'm going to cover it with soil, and there you are. That's in the fall, right? In the spring, I plant cucumbers on top of that. Yes, in the first year, you can plant cucumbers. Look at that. Look at the yield I'm getting. What's this over here? Kale. That kale was planted in spring. That kale, actually, I just did this. This is just recently. That kale I pulled out a few weeks ago. It went through the whole winter and back into the new year. And along here are some tomatoes. But this is hugelkultur. So if you've got a little bit bigger property and you've got sticks and stuff that you don't want, if you don't want it in your growing area, put it at the back of your property, cover it with some soybean meal if you don't have enough grass. You want to get some nitrogen in with the wood. So there's carbon and nitrogen, and they'll break down together. Throw some soil on it, throw some grass clippings. In a couple of years, that mound is gold for you. It's gold. It's wonderfully nutritious, rotted stuff, and it is not compost exactly, but it's got worms in it, and things are living in it, and it's really good for your garden. It's absolutely fantastic. And if you have any animal manure, you can throw it on there. If you do have animal manure, never put it straight on the garden. Let it sit for a year in your place. And the main reason is a lot of animals will eat thorns and really bad weeds in the fields. And when they poop it out, when it's fresh, the seeds are very much alive. If you put animal manure all over your garden, you could have the worst weed seed bed that you can imagine. So always let animal manure really, if you can give it 2 years, it's even better. And there's the yield, there's the cucumbers looking fantastic. That's on that hugelkultur that I created just in the fall. This was last summer. This is last summer's yield. And it's looking even better this year. And here's a larger scale hugel, one of my friends who has a farm. I explained all this to him and he tried it. We actually dug a little bit of a hole here, put all these sticks and stuff and everything from there. And then he put a fence around it, because he planted squash the next summer on that hugel, and he had hundreds of squash from that. It was productive right away. They're so rich in carbon in that hugel. And he put a fence around it to stop the groundhogs from getting in there. but the fence was too strong. They love strong fences. They'll climb a fence. Now, don't clean up too much in the fall. Everybody cleans up. Everybody wants their garden to look like their living room these days. It's a big mistake. Everybody cuts their grass so that it looks like a carpet. It shouldn't look like a carpet. I'm a Penn State master gardener. They recommend never cutting your grass below 3 inches. Never, because then you'll have weeds. You'll think you have a lawn. You don't, you have a patch of weeds. The grass has to be 3 inches long. It's a solar panel. It's got to be able to feed its roots and give energy to the roots. And then the grass will overpower the weeds. You will have pure grass like a golf course if you let it go never below 3 inches. But everybody wants to cut it down to the floor, and that's why what you're looking at is clover mainly and weeds. You're not looking at grass. So it's green and it's short, but it's not grass. So don't clean up too much in the fall. Nature never cleans up. This is an old Virginia creeper here on my building, and I leave it because there's something there. What the heck is that? And we go in closer, and that's what's left on the Virginia creeper. If I put that in the compost heap, that would get composted. And what that is a praying mantis cocoon. And in there is 100 praying mantis babies waiting to be born in the spring. And I want those in my yard for pest control. So if I had cleaned, now what I did do, I cut it off there and I cut it off there, and I brought it into the fridge in a plastic bag. And I kept it in my salad drawer. And the reason I did that is because it was too exposed there, the birds would get it. But don't bring it out until you're ready, because the moment you take it out and it goes to 70, all these little critters will come crawling out of here. I know people who've taken these things out of their fridge and forgotten it, and they come back in their kitchens covered in praying mantis, baby praying mantis. So you cut that off, and then you take it out in the spring and you put it in the garden, and it will do its thing. And of course, as we get towards the fall, we could do row covers. This is a commercial farm with row covers on kale, trying to extend the season a little bit, which it will. There's row covers in a smaller garden like ours with some wire over. You can use it in spring and you can use it in the fall. So definitely get into extension of plants. And then, of course, when you come indoors in the winter, there's still some winter gardening you can do, and this is called microgreens. So you buy the seeds. These are, I think, daikon radish, and you sprinkle them on top of ½ an inch of soil. You keep it wet for 10 days, and in 10 days you have a harvest. I mean, how cool is that? You can be eating greens all through the winter. The children can be the farmers in your house, growing the microgreens for you. Very simple. There's a YouTube video I made there, Tony Fix It at YouTube, or Tony Buck. Just type in Tony Buck and microgreens, and you'll get my video of how to do it. Very simple. And you buy bulk seeds from Johnny's Seeds or somewhere like that. Don't buy small packets. You have to buy a lot. I buy a pound at a time. They'll last all winter. So here's my south-facing porch in winter. You don't have to stop growing. I bring things in. What have I got here? There's the sage plant. There's rosemary. This is French sorrel, and this is you know, beets. What are they called? Anyway, there's Chinese cabbage in there. Swiss chard. That's what that is. There's parsley, and there's gotu kola. I eat gotu kola, and this is lemon verbena plant. So this is tea. I drink that tea. I drink all this actually in tea. There's it's rosemary and lavender. Make them all into teas. This is January this year on my back porch. I got Swiss chard growing and lots of greens in January. So you can do that. I glassed in my back porch real cheap, went to an auction, bought some glass, did that. You don't need to see that. So Benjamin Rush, a local boy, 1812, signer of the Constitution, or whatever it was, Declaration of Independence. He said, digging in a garden was one of the activities that distinguished those male patients who recovered from their mania from those that did not. Well, if you're a gardener, you know that. You know that this is good for the mind. And he was really the father of American psychiatry, Benjamin Rush, back then. So thank you for listening. Go Coatesville Victory Gardens. Let's do it. Sarah, come on board. What's going on?
Thanks, Tony. That was great.
You enjoyed that?
Yeah, it was wonderful. I
That
love
was
all the pictures.
good.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, we have a minute or two. You can chat or type in if you want to.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Peter's shouting something out. Can you unmute Peter? He's trying to say something.
Is he?
Oh, there. What is it, Pete?
I said it was excellent, very well detailed,
Oh, you liked it?
very detailed, had a lot of good points to listen and learn. It was very well detailed.
Good. So that's I got an A from the teacher.
That's right.
All right, Jean is asking if the video will be available online later.
Yes, we're thinking of putting it on my YouTube channel, which is Tony Fix It at YouTube. Make sure it has this face, because there's some funny Fix It things. Tony Buck at YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll put it there. There's other stuff there. I've got about 30 videos there of different things I do in the garden. So yeah, go there. All right. So I'd like to say thanks, Sarah, for hosting this and setting it all up. She's the techie. She's the one who knows how to do it. Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great.
All right. We did it once. We'll see if we can do it again.
Yeah, I look forward to the next one. Thanks everybody for coming.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Sarah.
See ya.
See you, Pete.
Bye.
Bye. How do I get out of here? Oh.